It's an important part of these annual fora to hear from Ofcom about some of the latest research on the underlying state of play on the internet in the UK. The more we know about that, the better informed our discussions are going to be. Yih-Choung has been a director and more recently group director at Ofcom for almost 15 years. He's worked on a wide variety of issues concerned with digital markets. And his presentation this morning is responding to two recent Ofcom reports, Online Nation and Internet Futures, which provide context to the discussions we're having this week.
Good morning. I'm delighted to join the IGF this morning as we think about the future of the internet. Rather than offering any grand predictions about the shape of things to come, I thought it might be a good opportunity to share a few of the key findings from two recent Ofcom publications. Firstly, Online Nation, which provides some insight into how people live their lives online in the UK. And secondly, Technology Futures, which puts a spotlight on the technologies which may influence the internet of the future. I'll then share some thoughts on how the two realities of people becoming increasingly dependent on the internet for more and more aspects of their lives and the rapid pace of technological change are shaping Ofcom's approach as the communications regulator and as the future online safety regulator. So, starting with our attitudes and behaviours, let me highlight three key aspects of being an online nation. Firstly, we spend an enormous amount of time online and rely on internet services for virtually all aspects of our lives. How we communicate, how we find information, how we shop, educate and entertain ourselves. And of course, the pandemic has increased our dependency and in some cases reoriented our use of the internet. By the end of 2020, about 94% of UK homes had internet access, up from about 89% in 2019. And those of us online spent on average more than a quarter of our waking hours online in 2020 via smartphones, tablets and computers. Unsurprisingly, our time peaked online during the lockdowns. The amount of broadband data we use in the UK doubled. So did the time we spent watching streaming services on TV sets. But perhaps most strikingly, the pandemic may have reoriented our use of the internet in how we learn, with our children engaging in online educational platforms and remote learning, and how we work, accelerating our adoption of cloud-based services and video conferencing, which may prove to be a lasting legacy of the lockdowns. Secondly, but as more and more services are delivered online, the risk of exclusion for those who are not online or who can't engage effectively online grows ever bigger. The digital divide was a gaping chasm during lockdown when shops, schools and workplaces were closed and the only way to see loved ones was on a digital screen. 6% of households don't have home internet access, with 14% of adults accessing the internet only infrequently. And that figure doubles for those in lower socio-economic households and triples for those who are older, those over 64. We're also now seeing it's a more complex picture than the binary question of whether you have internet access or not. For example, of those who do have access, 5% say they aren't confident in using the internet. Or for the 10% of online adults who rely on a mobile phone for internet access, working or learning from home or completing online forms can be a real struggle. Thirdly, most of the content on the internet now is user-generated content. For example, particularly for younger smartphone users, social video platforms such as Facebook, TikTok and Snapchat can make up a substantial proportion of time spent online, from the moment we wake up to when we go to sleep. This brings tremendous benefits, but also increases the likelihood of coming across harmful content. To the benefits, the internet has had a powerful democratizing effect. People have a voice like never before, whether it's in mobilizing support for movements such as Black Lives Matter, or in reviewing products to help other users make better choices. It's easier for us to make connections with people around the world with shared experiences or shared interests, no matter how niche, For example, completing that rare collection of miniature soldiers with the help of eBay. How-to videos have become hugely popular, supporting us in all sorts of ways. Our research finds that nearly a third of video site users reported watching DIY videos. In the early months of lockdown, there was a 458% increase in daily views of YouTube videos related to sourdough bread. But it's not all good. Our research finds that 70% of video site users had seen or experienced something potentially harmful in the 3 months prior to being surveyed. Fake news and offensive language were the most prevalent online content experiences that might be considered harmful, followed by fake or deceptive images and videos. And sadly, children are particularly vulnerable. 81% of 12 to 15-year-olds, that's rather higher than the corresponding figure of 62% of adults, say that they've had a potentially harmful experience online in the past year. On mobile phones, the most common of these experiences was being contacted online by someone you don't know who wants to be your friend, cited by 30% overall. And a significant minority had seen something scary or troubling at 18%, or seen something of a sexual nature that made them feel uncomfortable at 17%. Children are also coming across bullying. A quarter of 8 to 11-year-olds and a third of 12 to 15-year-olds said they had personally been bullied, either online or offline. Now, with those rather sobering thoughts, let me change direction to look briefly at innovation and technological developments, with 3 things that may shape our behaviours and use of the internet in the future. Firstly, adoption curves are getting steeper. Arguably, a virtuous circle of better, faster communication networks with more connected devices and new services means online behaviour is evolving at breakneck pace as we communicate with each other and create and share content in new and different ways. For example, it took 6 years from the launch of the iPhone in 2007 for 50% of UK adults to have a smartphone. And of course, 14 years later, it's hard to remember how we managed without our smartphones, which have become replacements not only for our phone, but our wallets, our maps, and our torches, to name but a few. And that pace of innovation seems to continue with the launch of various connected devices from smartwatches to virtual reality headsets. It was only 7 years ago when Amazon's smart speaker Alexa was released, swiftly followed by Google Nest and Apple HomePods, amongst others. And now smart speakers are in more than half of UK homes. Secondly, new services look like they will continue to emerge and grow really quickly. Concerns persist, understandably, that the established tech giants have grown stronger than ever. However, the pandemic has shown that the internet continues to foster innovation where new players with new propositions have the opportunity to grow very quickly. For example, TikTok, which only launched in the UK in 2017, increased its number of UK adult users from 3.2 million in September 2019 to 11.5 million in September 2020. By March of this year, over a third of 13 to 17-year-olds said they used TikTok. Or take Zoom, which grew from a few 100,000 users in the first 2 months of 2020 to more than 13 million in April and May, though Microsoft Teams also grew from 3 million pre-pandemic to 13.7 million in March of this year. The internet does, however, remain the enabler of fast-changing market dynamics. We've also seen platforms grow rapidly due to temporary market conditions, but struggle to sustain that growth and subsequently decline. Houseparty, another group video chat app, for example, had 4.6 million UK adult visitors at its peak in March 2020, but declined in reach since then, and this month has shut down completely. Thirdly, technology is driving ever greater levels of consumer immersion. The internet has moved from desktop to laptop to smartphone, from text to pictures to video, from wired to wireless, from voice over IP to voice calling, from smart device to smart home and onwards to smart car and smart city. Ofcom's Internet Futures publication earlier this year pointed towards a future where immersive technology becomes ever more pervasive. The shift from Voice over Internet Protocol, or VoIP, to video conferencing, as we've seen so vividly during the pandemic, is only an early stage in the progress of immersive communications technology. We've already seen the concept of the metaverse, where virtual shared space converges with reality. You may have seen US rapper Travis Scott perform a live set inside the online game Fortnite last year, in which more than 12 million players took part. And Mark Zuckerberg has already announced his intention for Facebook to become a metaverse company in the future. The so-called Internet of Senses, or iOS, could underpin the potential shift from an emotionally neutral web to a multi-sensory metaverse experience. While still far from reality, the concept of extending our sensorial experiences to the internet has been considered for years as part of ongoing research and development projects, as explored in our technology research publications. We're starting to see early steps by industry to introduce or develop immersive communications in the home, building on existing smart speakers. For example, the recent announcement of Amazon Astro, a household robot powered by Alexa smart home technology designed to check on pets, people, and home security. But what might this mean for regulation? We've been thinking about that question at Ofcom as we prepare to take on new duties designed to create a safer life online for people in the UK. Let me leave you with 3 thoughts. Firstly, regulation must be able to adapt and not take a fixed rule approach. The Online Safety Bill, which establishes a new regulatory framework to tackle harmful content online, puts the onus on the platforms to assess and respond to risks to users and to design systems and processes to address them. We believe this is the right approach, as regulation based solely on enforcement against fixed rules would not be effective for 2 reasons. One, as we've seen, these are services where change and innovation are so rapid and so constant that we need an approach to regulation that can respond at speed. 2, the sector itself overwhelmingly drives relevant technological innovation, from which we as users derive significant benefit. And this means that the industry itself is best placed to design and own the technical solutions and be held to account for their success or failure. Secondly, it's not possible to regulate online content. Rather, online platforms must have a duty of care to look after their users. Under the Online Safety Bill, Ofcom will be asked to hold platforms to account for assessing the risks to their users and for putting in place tangible measures to address them. In particular, we'll establish codes of practice to help companies meet their duties, and we'll be examining and enforcing against those systems and processes rather than the content. That's an important difference to how we regulate television, radio, and on-demand content. We'll hold platforms to account for assessing the risks to their users and ensure that companies take a preventative approach to risk. When it comes to enforcement, our watchwords will be targeted, transparent, and proportionate. Being targeted at the most serious harm is really important. We all know the internet is virtually a boundless realm. We need to remember that it will never be possible to prevent every instance of harm occurring. We'll ensure companies are transparent, shining a light on the nature of the problem and on whether their efforts to protect users are really effective. At the moment, platforms are basically free to set their own rules without even explaining what they are. We'll also make sure our rules support innovation and competition in the UK, and that our interventions are proportionate. Crucially, that includes protecting people's freedom of expression. Thirdly, and finally, collaboration and coordination will be critical. The number of platforms, devices, and networks that serve up content continues to grow. so do the technical and economic issues confronting regulators. In Ofcom's case, these go much wider than traditional media and telecoms. They include supply chains, cloud computing, online competition, and network security and resilience, as well as online content. These are complex, overlapping issues. No one can address them alone, nor can we meet any of the biggest challenges we face, whether it's the impact of a global pandemic on our sectors or the blistering pace of technological and societal change, if we stand apart. The global reach of the platforms means that partnerships and cooperation with other bodies will be even more important in order to successfully address online safety. Video sharing regulation is untried around the world, so we've been working with EU and international regulators to share lessons and, where we can, harmonise our approaches. In the UK, we're collaborating in a second way through a formal body. We've formed something called the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum. Our fellow UK members are the Information Commissioner's Office, which leads on data protection, the Financial Conduct Authority, and the Competition and Markets Authority. The aim of the DRCF is clear, consistent, and coordinated regulation. We also want to build a collective view of important industry trends and innovations. We can make cost savings by pooling resources and avoiding duplication, and we can respond quickly to changes in the market. Finally, the consumer trends and the technological changes that I started with, the pervasiveness of online, the importance of digital inclusion, the prominence of user-generated content, the fast-moving adoption of new services, the rapid change in the marketplace, and the trajectory towards ever greater immersion highlight how important it is that users have the skills to participate effectively and safely in the online world. Here again, collaboration across governments, regulators, industry, academics, advocacy groups, and the third sector is critical, and an area that we are investing in through our Making Sense of Media program to help improve online skills, knowledge, and understanding. So, I look forward to working together as we look ahead to a future of the internet which continues to deliver huge innovation and benefits, but also a safer life online.
And now we come to the questions and answers session. We had one or two questions coming in during the course of the presentation. I've also got some that we had addressed to you from earlier in the day. But maybe I could start with something that you mentioned, which was the COVID pandemic and the impact that that's had on internet use in the UK. Could you say what's most surprised you about that response, and also perhaps what Ofcom has done to alter the way in which it looks at things as a result of that?
Thank you, David. I think actually the thing that strikes me most about the research coming out of the pandemic is that actually a lot of it isn't that surprising. When we're all stuck in our homes and can't do anything else, then understandably we take to the internet and we spend a lot more time on that. In some respects, I'd say 3 hours, 37 minutes wasn't as high as some people might have thought in terms of the time we spent. So perhaps the thing I found most interesting was that number is an average across a great range of different usages. Of course, younger people spend more time. We had 15, 16-year-olds who were spending almost 5 hours a day on average. And of course, some of our qualitative research pointed to anecdotes with one individual having to almost bribe her son to come out of his bedroom because he's online to come down for meals. So at one end of the spectrum, you get that. At the other end, as I mentioned, we still have 6% of households who are not online at all and therefore contributing nothing to that average. And of course, the proportion online has grown during the pandemic. Again, we might expect that as the pandemic has really accelerated some underlying trends. But very significant that I think there is a growing digital exclusion challenge that's become quite apparent.
So can I maybe just take that a little further with this question of the digital exclusion challenge? I notice an increasing number of services, including some public services, moving towards a kind of default online option or an online only option, which is likely to exacerbate digital exclusion or the impact of digital exclusion. I wonder if you could say something about how you're discussing that with the other government departments which are responsible for providing public services or overseeing the services that are provided in the private sector.
I think that point in your question, David, is really important, that this is multifaceted and covers a number of different government departments. We have some responsibilities in that, but it is a small part of it. I mean, to illustrate that, I would suggest that if you asked me the question of digital exclusion 5-6 years ago, the focus would have been very much, at least in our sort of circles, around broadband availability. So someone have access to good quality broadband or not, in that very binary way. And I think what we're discovering is the question is more nuanced than that. As I said, 10% of adults mobile only. That clearly isn't a great experience if you're trying to fill in the government forms that you've just referred to or whatever, and that's quite problematic. Obviously, we saw in terms of education challenges with children not having access to a suitable device or having to share that and really impeding their ability to learn. So I think there's a much broader holistic question which government needs to engage in. We are trying to do our part. For example, we have something we refer to as our Making Sense of Media program, which is really around digital literacy, working not just with DCMS, our own department, but speaking with the Department of Education as well. So there is a bigger question about how do we close the gap on some of these issues, which are becoming so much more important to us as a society.
Okay, we had a number of questions coming in about the online safety bill. That wouldn't surprise you. We have a session later in the day which is specifically looking at that, and which does have an Ofcom speaker. So I don't want necessarily to go into that much depth on it here. But I think this particular question, maybe you could respond to. A comment essentially that freedom of expression isn't the same as unregulated speech, and that we need regulated speech to deliver freedom of speech. How can that be done with user-generated content? Maybe that's a sampler for what we can discuss.
Yes, that's very good. Well, yeah, I think that's a fair point. Obviously, we have a long track record. I'd like to think a successful one in trying to balance that protection of audiences, but also preserve freedom of expression when it comes to traditional broadcast content. And so clearly, our major broadcasters are regulated for various things, for example, around news, on due impartiality and the rest of it. But right at the core of that, we want to maintain freedom of expression. So I agree that just because something is regulated doesn't mean that's somehow suppression of freedom of expression. Quite the opposite. When it comes to user-generated content, yes, I think that's quite tricky. Of course, what the online safety bill is trying to do in a very significant part is it depends on the type of question, but for illegal content, then obviously that's a problem. And whether it's child sexual exploitation and abuse or hate speech, then I think that's rather clearer. For the largest platforms, then there is this question of legal but harmful content. And I think a big part of that is actually around transparency, trying to make sure that we understand what community standards are, that the platforms are held to account, to making sure that's very public, and that essentially they live to their own rules on that. So that's the kind of thing that we'd be monitoring very, very carefully.
Something that picks up on that, actually, which has also just come in the Q&A. Will Ofcom look at the contribution to online safety of technical standards and the adoption of a safety by design approach? Is that part of your agenda? Maybe you could say a bit about it.
Yes, I think that's hugely important. I mean, one of the things that we're interested in, both through the Making Sense of Media program that I mentioned, as well as one of the bits of the online safety bill, is around media literacy. And I think that's not just about trying to improve the critical awareness of users, which is a huge part of how I think we need to make improvements. But part of that then is trying to influence platform design. So how do we make sure that user interfaces are designed in a way which helps people to understand that actually I can take action if there's content which I find concerning, or questions around misinformation and disinformation, which obviously are hugely problematic, potentially, at least in the context of a functioning democratic society. How can I look for other sources which are more authoritative, or things like that? So I think safety by design is a really big part of the overall philosophical framework, and working with the platforms to understand how we can make progress is really important, being informed by some of the research.
So one of the aspects of that I know comes out quite a lot in work in the UN context, in the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, is about foresight analysis. So just picking up on the points you were making about the metaverse and other innovations like that, whose outcomes are highly unpredictable, and so forth. What is Ofcom doing in its analytical work that might be regarded as foresight analysis, and what are your kind of key objectives within that area?
I think one of the great privileges of working in this space, of course, is the rate of technological development, as I mentioned earlier, and the consumer behavioral change which goes along with that at a pretty rapid pace. And that means, our jobs remain really very interesting. But it's a huge challenge in policy terms, not to be a long way behind the curve in terms of what's coming up. So one of the things that I'm very keen to do in terms of our strategy function, but actually also, as I mentioned, in terms of technologies, that we invest in trying to understand where things are going. So we do quite a lot of horizon scanning work, where we think, what are the underlying trends? For example, through the pandemic, in terms of some of the macroeconomic effects, what are the technological trends? We have an emerging technology team, the hard work of which everyone gets to see in some of the published reports that we put out there, where the intention is to look past 5-10 years and some of the technologies coming down the line. Now, I don't think we're well placed to try and predict what's going to happen, but improving our understanding, working with industry players and others as to some of these directions, I think starts to inform us about some of the things which we need to be mindful of. Now, often that won't be for us to deal with directly, but we have a role as a technical advisor in many respects to government, and having those conversations where we start to see how the policy needs to be developed earlier, I think is important. I mean, to give you a specific example, I think online gaming is a really interesting example. And as a converge regulator, I'm kind of intrigued by the fact that we see highly immersive, interactive content. And you can see the direction of travel in terms of some of the professional content to get that sort of connection that we see on the likes of YouTube and some of the user-generated content. Simultaneously, though, of course, the research tells us that a lot of young people are going to do online gaming, not necessarily because they're trying to play games in that sense, but because they just want to hang out with their friends. It's basically a communication tool in a very similar way to social media. So these things come together and not necessarily in the eye of the user, very distinct things. But what does that then mean for some of the challenges, some of the harms that I was talking about earlier? And are we, cognizant of how those development goes? So we're actively putting effort into understanding some of those trends and talking to various market participants.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's a very short session, this, and we've come to the end of the time that's allotted for it. So I'd just like to thank you very much indeed for coming on and talking about a wide range of issues and drawing attention to the Ofcom research reports, which I find personally very useful and which I hope are really widely read. I certainly commend them to people in the audience who are not familiar with them to look them out and address them. So many thanks indeed for taking part. And as I say, it's crucial to the success of this forum that we're well informed about the current situation and what is coming in the future. There are a number of questions that couldn't be picked up, which are about around the online safety bill, and I would suggest to the participants who, with those that we might pick them up later in the day in that session. So on behalf of the audience, many thanks to you.